The battlefield stretched before him like a wound that refused to heal. 10 years had passed since the Great Pack War, yet Theron Blackwood could still taste the ash on his tongue, still feel the weight of his dying brother in his arms. The memory came without warning, as it always did, pulling him back to that cursed night when the sky burned orange and the screams of wolves filled the air like a chorus of the damned. He stood now on the balcony of the Nightfang Keep, his scarred hands gripping the cold stone railing. The morning sun crept over the eastern mountains, painting the kingdom in shades of gold and amber. It was beautiful, this land he ruled. Beautiful and broken and haunted by ghosts only he could see. The scar on his chest ached. It always ached when he remembered. A jagged line of pale flesh that ran from his left shoulder to his right hip, a permanent reminder of the blade that should have killed him. Would have killed him if his younger brother Cassian had not thrown himself between Theron and the enemy Alpha. Cassian had been 19 years old, brave and foolish and so full of life that his death had seemed impossible, even as the blood poured from his throat and his eyes grew dim. Theron had held him in that muddy field, screaming for the healers who would never arrive in time. He had watched the light fade from his brother's eyes and felt something inside himself die alongside him. That was the night Theron Blackwood became the Alpha King. That was the night he stopped being human. At 32 years old, Theron had ruled longer than most Alphas twice his age. His dark hair was threaded with premature silver at the temples. His face was hard, angular, with golden eyes that made wolves look away when he passed. Cold as the winter sun, they held the weight of 1,000 battles and the memory of everyone he had failed to save. A knock at the chamber door pulled him from the memory. He did not turn, did not acknowledge the intrusion. He knew who it was before the deep voice rumbled through the silence. General Marcus Ironclaw stepped onto the balcony, his boots heavy against the stone. At 55 years old, he was the oldest warrior in the Nightfang Guard, a grizzled veteran with gray eyes that missed nothing. He had served 3 generations of Blackwood Alphas, and he was the closest thing to a father Theron had ever known. The old general stood beside him in silence for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with concern. "The council grows restless. They demand an answer about the Blood Moon Ball." Theron's jaw tightened. "Let them demand. They speak of weakness, my king. An alpha without a Luna is an alpha without an heir. Without an heir, the bloodline ends. Without the bloodline, the kingdom falls." The words were not new. Theron had heard them 1,000 times from 100 different mouths. The council of elders, the noble families, the neighboring pack leaders, they all wanted the same thing. They wanted him to choose a mate, to produce children, to secure the future of the Nightfang dynasty. What they did not understand was that the future had died in a muddy field 10 years ago, clutched in Theron's arms while the world burned around them. "I will attend the ball," Theron said finally, his voice flat and cold. "But not for the reasons they expect." Marcus turned to look at him, one gray eyebrow raised. "Then why?" Theron reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of parchment, its edges worn from repeated handling. He handed it to the old general without a word. Marcus read the message twice, his weathered face growing pale. When he looked up, there was something in his eyes that Theron had not seen in years: fear. "This cannot be real. The Council of Shadows was destroyed. We burned their strongholds, executed their leaders. They are gone. Someone disagrees with that assessment." Theron took back the letter and studied the signature at the bottom. A single letter, written in ink that seemed to shimmer faintly in the morning light. S. The signature meant nothing to Marcus, but to Theron it meant everything. Lady Seraphina Ashford had been the Luna of the Silvercrest Pack, a woman of extraordinary beauty and even more extraordinary power. She had been one of the last known carriers of the Moonborn bloodline, a lineage that traced back to the first Luna Queen who had walked beneath the stars 1,000 years ago. The Moonborn were said to possess abilities that defied explanation: healing, prophecy, the power to command the very light of the moon itself. Seraphina had died 10 years ago, murdered by forces unknown. Her death had been ruled an accident, a tragic fall from a cliff during a storm. But Theron had always suspected otherwise. The timing had been too convenient, too closely aligned with the final battles of the Great Pack War. And now, a decade later, a letter had arrived bearing her initial. A warning about the Council of Shadows, a message that spoke of dangers yet to come. "Either someone is playing a very dangerous game," Theron said quietly, "or the dead have learned to write." Marcus shook his head slowly. If the Council of Shadows has truly returned, the Blood Moon Ball would be the perfect place to strike. Every alpha in the realm will be there, every noble family. It would be a massacre. Or an opportunity. Theron tucked the letter back into his coat. "I need to see who attends, who watches, who whispers in dark corners when they think no one is listening." "And if you find them?" Theron turned to face the old general, and for the first time that morning, something like life flickered in his golden eyes. "Then I will remind them why the Blackwood name is feared." Far to the south, in a manor house that had once been her home, Alara Ashford knelt on cold stone floors and scrubbed until her hands bled. The water in her bucket had long since turned gray with filth. Her knees ached from hours of kneeling, and her back burned from the weight of endless labor. But she did not stop. She could not stop. To stop was to invite punishment, and Morgana's punishments were not easily forgotten. She had been 14 years old when her mother died, 14 years old when Morgana, her father's second wife, had taken control of the Silvercrest estate, 14 years old when the whispers began, spreading through the pack like poison. They said she had killed her mother. They said she had pushed Lady Seraphina from the cliff during a storm, that she had watched her own mother fall to her death and felt nothing. They said she was cursed, that the moon had marked her for darkness, that evil lived behind her silver eyes. None of it was true, but truth had never mattered to Morgana. 10 years had passed since that terrible night. 10 years of servitude, of silence, of slowly forgetting what it felt like to be treated as human. At 24 years old, Alara had spent nearly half her life as a prisoner in her own home. She caught her reflection in the bucket of gray water. Midnight black hair, tangled and unwashed, framed a face that had grown gaunt from years of meager meals. Her skin was pale, her cheekbones sharp, but her eyes remained unchanged. Silver as moonlight, bright as stars, they held a fire that no amount of suffering had managed to extinguish. Those eyes were her mother's gift, the last piece of Seraphina that Morgana could not take away. The woman swept into the great hall now, her silk gown rustling against the marble floors. Behind her came Vivienne, Morgana's daughter from a previous marriage. At 26, Vivienne was everything Alara was not allowed to be. Proud, pampered, perfectly positioned to inherit everything that had once belonged to Alara's mother. Vivienne's golden hair caught the light as she passed, and she made a point of stepping on the still wet floor that Alara had just finished cleaning. The muddy footprint spread across the marble like an accusation. "You missed a spot," Vivienne said sweetly, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. Alara did not respond. She had learned long ago that words were weapons in this house, and she was not permitted to fight back. Instead, she simply dipped her brush back into the filthy water and began scrubbing again. Morgana paused near the window, her attention fixed on something beyond the glass. When she spoke, her voice carried the particular tone she reserved for delivering news she knew would cause pain. "The Alpha King will attend the Blood Moon Ball. He seeks a Luna." Vivienne's gasp was theatrical, rehearsed. "Mother, do you think he might choose me?" "Why would he choose anyone else? You are beautiful, well-bred, and connected to one of the oldest families in the realm." Morgana's eyes slid toward Alara, still kneeling on the floor. "Unlike some, you know your worth." Alara kept her head down, but her hands had stopped moving. The Alpha King, Theron Blackwood. She had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The warrior who had ended the Great Pack War. The king who had never taken a Luna. The man they called the Ghost of Nightfang, because he moved through the world like a shadow and left only death in his wake. She had never seen him, had never wanted to. Men like Theron Blackwood existed in a world so far removed from her own that they might as well have been myths. Morgana's heels clicked against the floor as she approached. She stopped directly in front of Alara, close enough that the hem of her gown brushed against the scrub brush. "You will remain in the cellar during the ball. The doors will be locked. You will not eat, you will not sleep, you will not make a single sound. Do you understand?" Alara looked up. She knew she should not. She knew that meeting Morgana's eyes was an act of defiance that would not go unpunished. But something inside her, something that had been building for years, refused to look away. "Yes, Lady Morgana." The older woman's eyes narrowed slightly, searching for something in Alara's expression. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because she turned away without another word. But as she walked toward the door, she paused. Her voice drifted back, casual and cruel. "Your mother made the same mistake, you know. She thought she was special. She thought the moon had chosen her for something greater, and look where that got her. The words hit Alara like a physical blow. She felt them in her chest, in her throat, in the place where her heart used to beat without pain. But she did not react. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply waited until Morgana and Vivian had gone, until the sound of their footsteps had faded into silence. Then she set down her brush, dried her bleeding hands on her threadbare dress, and walked to the servants' quarters. The room was small and cold, little more than a closet with a narrow bed and a single window that let in the moonlight. But it was hers, the only space in this entire house where she could breathe without permission. She reached beneath her mattress and pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age and stained with use. Her mother's journal, the only thing she had managed to save when Morgana had burned everything else. Alara opened it to a page she had read 1,000 times, a page filled with her mother's elegant handwriting. "My dearest daughter," the words began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the truth has been kept from you. But the truth cannot stay buried forever. It rises like the moon, no matter how deep the darkness. You are not what they say you are. You are not cursed. You are not evil. You are the last daughter of the moonborn line, and one day when the time is right, you will understand what that means. Until then, hide your light, protect your heart, and when the moment comes, when destiny calls your name, do not be afraid to answer. The moon sees you, my love, even when no one else does." Alara closed the journal and pressed it against her chest. She did not understand what her mother had meant. She did not know what the moonborn line was or why it mattered, but she believed with every fiber of her being that her mother had not been mad, that these words were not the ravings of a desperate woman. Her mother had known something, had seen something, and Morgana had killed her for it. The thought had taken root in Alara's mind years ago, a seed of suspicion that had grown into absolute certainty. She had no proof, no evidence, nothing that would convince anyone in a world where her word meant less than dirt. But she knew, and someday, somehow, she would make Morgana pay. She pulled out the second item hidden beneath her mattress. A knife, small and sharp, with a handle carved from moonstone. Her mother's knife. The blade that Lady Seraphina had used to train, to fight, to protect herself in a world that wanted her dead. Alara had taught herself to use it. Night after night, while the house slept, she had crept into the gardens and practiced the movements she had found in her mother's journal. Thrusts and parries, blocks and strikes. Her form was imperfect, her technique rough, but she was no longer helpless. She was no longer the broken little girl who had watched her mother fall. The door creaked open, and Alara's hand moved instinctively to the knife. But it was only Iris, the youngest of the kitchen servants, her round face pale with excitement. "Have you heard?" she whispered, slipping into the room and closing the door behind her. "About the ball?" Alara nodded slowly, the Alpha King. Iris clasped her hands together, her eyes shining. "They say he has never chosen a Luna. They say he is cursed, just like—" She trailed off, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Just like me?" Alara finished for her, and there was no bitterness in her voice, only exhaustion. "I did not mean it that way." Iris sat down on the edge of the bed, her voice dropping even lower. "But Alara, what if this is your chance? What if you could escape?" Alara shook her head. "You heard, Lady Morgana. I am to be locked in the cellar. Since when has that stopped you?" The question hung in the air between them. Iris was right, of course. Alara had escaped the cellar before, had found ways to slip through the cracks in Morgana's control. But this was different. This was the Blood Moon Ball, the most important gathering in a decade. The security would be unlike anything she had ever faced. And yet, the letter her mother had written burned in her mind. "When destiny calls your name, do not be afraid to answer." What if this was the moment? What if the Blood Moon Ball was not just Vivian's opportunity, but hers as well? Not to find a mate, not to catch the eye of some powerful alpha, but to find answers, to discover what Morgana was hiding, to uncover the truth about her mother's death. "I need to think," Alara said finally. "Tell Nola and Fern to meet me in the garden after midnight. We need to talk." Iris's face split into a grin. "We already have a plan." "Of course you do." When the servant had gone, Alara returned to the window and looked up at the sky. The moon hung overhead, fat and silver, just days away from turning red. The blood moon, the night when the veil between worlds grew thin and destiny walked among the living. "I do not know what you want from me," Ilara whispered to the moon, "but I am done hiding. I am done being afraid." She touched the mark on her wrist, the small birthmark shaped like a crescent that had been there since the day she was born. Her mother had possessed the same mark. It was, she had always assumed, nothing more than a family trait. But as she watched, something strange happened. The mark seemed to glow faintly, just for a moment, pulsing with a light that came from somewhere deep within her skin. Ilara pulled her hand back, her heart pounding. It had to be a trick of the moonlight, a shadow, an illusion. But even as she told herself these things, she knew they were lies. Something was waking inside her, something that had been dormant for 24 years. And the blood moon was almost here. 3 days before the ball, Theron rode out from Nightfang Keep with only General Marcus at his side. The official story was that they were inspecting the eastern borders, checking for signs of rogue wolf activity. The truth was far more complicated. The letter had contained more than just a warning. Hidden within the text, visible only when held up to moonlight, had been a map, a location, a meeting point deep in the Silvercrest forest, far from any road or settlement. Someone wanted to talk, and Theron intended to find out who. They rode in silence for most of the journey, the horses' hooves muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. The forest grew denser as they traveled south, the ancient trees pressing close on either side like silent sentinels. This was old land, sacred land, the kind of place where wolves had hunted long before men learned to walk upright. "You should have brought more guards," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. "More guards would have attracted attention." "And if this is a trap?" Theron did not answer. He had considered the possibility, of course. The letter could easily be bait, a lure designed to draw him away from the safety of his keep. But something in his gut told him otherwise, something about the handwriting, the choice of words, the shimmer of the ink. Whoever had written that letter knew things that only a handful of people in the world should know. They reached the meeting point as the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees. It was a clearing, small and circular, dominated by a massive oak that must have been growing since before the first packs were formed. Carved into its trunk was a symbol that made Theron's blood run cold. The mark of the Moonborn. He dismounted slowly, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The clearing was empty, or at least appeared to be, but Theron had not survived this long by trusting appearances. "Show yourself," he called into the gathering darkness. I did not ride 3 days to speak with shadows. For a long moment nothing happened. Then, from the far side of the clearing, a figure emerged. She was young, perhaps 24 or 25, with hair the color of midnight that fell in tangled waves past her shoulders. Her face was thin, almost gaunt, with sharp cheekbones and a stubborn jaw that spoke of years of hardship endured. She wore a servant's dress, threadbare and patched, but she moved like a warrior, balanced, alert, ready. And her eyes, gods, her eyes. They were silver as moonlight, bright as stars, burning with a fire that made Theron's breath catch in his throat. In her hand, she held a knife. Theron's wolf stirred inside him, not with aggression, but with something far more unsettling, recognition, as if some part of him, some ancient instinct buried deep in his blood, knew exactly who this woman was. "You are not who I expected," he said carefully. The woman's eyes widened slightly, and he realized that she had not expected him either. Her gaze swept over him, taking in his armor, his sword, the insignia of the Alpha King emblazoned on his chest. Her grip on the knife tightened. "You!" She breathed the word like a curse. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question." They stood facing each other across the clearing, two strangers bound by circumstances neither of them understood. The oak tree loomed between them, its carved symbol watching like an ancient eye. "I received a letter," Theron said slowly, "a warning about the Council of Shadows. It told me to come here." The woman's face went pale. "That is impossible, and yet here we are." She shook her head, backing away slightly. "This has to be a mistake. I was looking for answers about my mother. I found a clue that led me to this place. There was no letter, no warning." "Who was your mother?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She hesitated, her silver eyes searching his face for something she clearly did not find. "Seraphina Ashford," she said finally. "Luna of the Silvercrest Pack. She died 10 years ago." The name hit Theron like a blade to the chest. Seraphina. The woman whose initial had signed the letter. The woman who had been dead for a decade. And standing before him was her daughter. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a picture that Theron did not want to see. Seraphina had been moonborn. If her daughter had inherited the bloodline, then that mark on her wrist was not a birthmark at all. It was a seal, a sign of power waiting to be awakened. And the Council of Shadows, if they truly had returned, would stop at nothing to destroy her. "Your name," he said. "Tell me your name." She lifted her chin defiantly, and despite the threadbare dress and the dirt on her face, she looked in that moment like a queen. Elara Ashford. Theron felt his wolf stir again, stronger this time. The beast within him pressed against his skin, demanding to be released, demanding to protect, to claim, to possess. He forced it back with an effort of will that left him breathless. This was not supposed to happen. He had come here looking for enemies, for conspirators, for the Shadow Council that threatened his kingdom. He had not come here to find a half-starved servant girl with silver eyes and a knife that had probably belonged to her dead mother. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. "You are in danger," he said quietly, "more danger than you know." Alara's laugh was bitter. "You think I do not know danger? I have lived with it every day since my mother died. I have been beaten, starved, called a murderer by people who smile while they destroy me. Do not speak to me of danger. The Council of Shadows killed your mother. They are real, and they are coming for you." The word stopped her cold. Whatever response she had been preparing died on her lips. "What did you say?" Theron reached into his coat and pulled out the letter. He held it up to the fading moonlight, watching as the hidden text became visible on the page. "Someone sent me this 3 days ago. Someone who signed with your mother's initial. Someone who knew about the moonborn bloodline and the threat it poses to those who would rule from the shadows." Elara stared at the letter, her knife forgotten in her hand. He could see her mind working, processing, trying to make sense of information that contradicted everything she thought she knew. "My mother is dead." "I know." "Then how?" "I do not know, but I intend to find out." Theron tucked the letter away and met her eyes. "The ball. You were planning to attend, were you not?" She did not deny it. "How did you know?" "Because it is what I would do." Theron allowed himself a small, grim smile. "The Council of Shadows will be there, hiding among the guests, watching for threats to their power. If we want to draw them out, we need to give them something to fear. You want to use me as bait. I want to give you a chance to find the truth about your mother. What you do with that chance is up to you." Elara was silent for a long moment, her silver eyes fixed on his face. He could practically see the war being waged inside her, the fear battling against the hope, the caution fighting the desperation. Finally she spoke. "Why would you help me? You do not know me. You have no reason to care what happens to some servant girl from a fallen house." Theron considered the question carefully. He could have lied, could have offered some noble explanation about justice or duty. But something about this woman, something about the steel in her spine and the fire in her eyes, made him want to tell the truth. "Because 10 years ago, I held my brother as he died, and I swore that I would destroy everyone responsible for the war that killed him. The Council of Shadows started that war. They engineered it, profited from it, and disappeared into the darkness when it was over, finding them, exposing them, ending them. That is all I have left." Elara absorbed this in silence. Then slowly she lowered her knife. "I will need a dress." Despite everything, Theron felt a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. "That can be arranged." They talked until the moon rose high overhead, sharing information and forming plans. Theron learned of Morgana's cruelty, of the cellar where Elara was meant to be imprisoned. Elara learned of the Great Pack War, of the brother Theron had lost, of the burden of kingship. They did not trust each other. Trust was a luxury neither could afford, but they understood each other, and for now, that was enough. As they prepared to part ways, Elara paused at the edge of the clearing. "The mark on my wrist," she said quietly. "Sometimes it glows, I do not know why." Theron looked at her, at the crescent-shaped mark barely visible beneath her sleeve, and felt his wolf stir one final time. "Because you are moonborn, the power is waking inside you, and when it fully awakens—" "What?" He did not answer immediately. The truth was too large, too dangerous to speak aloud in this sacred place. "We will talk more at the ball. For now, just stay alive. Can you do that?" "I have been doing it for 10 years. She turned and disappeared into the forest, moving with a grace that belied her servant's clothes. Theron watched her go, feeling something shift inside his chest, something he had not felt since the night his brother died. "Hope," Marcus rode up beside him, his weathered face grim. That was unexpected. Yes, she could be working with them. This could still be a trap. It could be, and yet you are going to help her. Theron swung himself back into the saddle and turned his horse toward the north. The moon hung overhead, silver and watching, casting its light across the ancient forest. The Council of Shadows killed Seraphina Ashford because she was moonborn. They killed my brother because he stood between them and power. They have been operating in the darkness for decades, destroying everyone who threatens them. He looked back toward the clearing, toward the oak tree with its carved symbol, toward the path Alara had taken through the trees. It is time to drag them into the light. The ride back to Night Fang Keep took 2 days. Theron spent most of it in silence, his mind turning over the events in the clearing. Alara Ashford, the daughter of Seraphina, the last of the moonborn bloodline. And someone somewhere wanted them to meet. The letter had not been a coincidence. Someone had orchestrated this meeting, manipulated events to bring them together in that sacred clearing. The question was why. Theron had no love for manipulation. He had spent his entire reign fighting against those who operated in shadows, who moved pieces on boards that ordinary wolves could not see. The Council of Shadows had been the worst of them, a cabal of powerful families who believed they had the right to control the fate of nations. They had started the Great Pack War to consolidate their power. They had sacrificed thousands of lives to reshape the world according to their vision. And when Theron had finally defeated them, when he had burned their strongholds and executed their leaders, they had simply vanished, or so he had thought. If the Council had truly returned, then the Blood Moon Ball was indeed a trap, but not for Theron. For Alara, they would know about her by now. A servant girl with silver eyes and a birthmark shaped like a crescent would not have escaped their notice. They would be watching, waiting, ready to strike. Unless Theron struck first. He arrived at Night Fang Keep on the evening before the ball, exhausted but focused. The servants had prepared his formal attire, the black coat and silver embroidery that marked him as Alpha King. He barely glanced at it as he strode through the halls, his mind already racing ahead to the night to come. Lord Aldrich Vane was waiting for him in the council chamber. At 62 years old, Aldrich was the oldest member of the Elder Council and the most influential. He had been Theron's mentor once, back when Theron was just a young prince learning the ways of war and politics. He had taught Theron everything he knew about strategy, about leadership, about the ruthless calculus of power. And Theron no longer trusted him. "My king." Aldrich rose from his chair and offered a slight bow. "We were concerned when you did not return on schedule." The inspection took longer than expected. Theron moved past him to the window, keeping his back to the older man. There were complications. What kind of complications? The kind that require my personal attention. He could feel Aldrich's eyes on him, probing, calculating. The old wolf had always been difficult to read, his true thoughts hidden behind a mask of loyalty and concern. But Theron had learned long ago that masks could be deceiving. "The ball preparations are complete," Aldrich said after a moment. "The noble families have arrived. Several have brought daughters of marriageable age. I am sure they have. You must choose eventually, my king. The bloodline cannot continue without an heir." Theron turned to face him, and something in his expression made Aldrich take a step back. "Tell me, old friend, what do you know about the Council of Shadows?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Aldrich's face remained perfectly calm, but Theron caught the briefest flicker of something in his eyes, surprise or fear. "The Council of Shadows was destroyed 10 years ago. You saw to that personally." "Did I?" Aldrich's mask slipped slightly. "Is there something you wish to tell me?" Theron smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "I wish to tell you that I remember everything about the war, every battle, every betrayal, every name on the list of those who aided the Council in their schemes." He stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse beating in Aldrich's throat. "I also remember who gave me that list. And I remember noticing, even then, that certain names were conspicuously absent." Aldrich's composure cracked entirely. "Whatever accusations you are making, I am making no accusations." Theron stepped back, his voice returning to its usual cold neutrality. "Not yet, but the ball will be very illuminating, I think. We shall see who watches whom and who whispers in the shadows when they think no one is listening." He walked to the door, then paused. "One more thing. The Silvercrest delegation. I want them seated near the front of the hall. All of them." "Silvercrest?" Aldrich frowned. "They are a minor house. Their Luna died years ago, and the current lady is hardly worth—" "All of them," Theron repeated, "including the servants. He left before Aldrich could respond, but he heard the old wolf's sharp intake of breath. A small victory, perhaps, but the war was just beginning. That night, as the moon rose toward fullness, Theron stood once again on his balcony and watched the stars emerge from the darkness. In a few hours, the blood moon ball would begin. The great hall would fill with nobles and warriors, with plotters and schemers, with wolves who smiled while they sharpened their knives. And somewhere among them would be Alara Ashford, a servant girl with silver eyes and a power she did not yet understand. Theron touched the scar on his chest, feeling the familiar ache that never quite went away. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow everything changes. The moon seemed to glow brighter in response, as if it too was waiting for the dawn. Miles away, in the cellar of the Silvercrest Manor, Alara sat in darkness and listened to the footsteps overhead. The household was in chaos, servants rushing to and fro, preparing for the journey to the ball. She could hear Vivian's shrill voice demanding attention, Morgana's cold commands echoing through the halls. They thought she was locked away. They thought she was helpless. They were wrong. The lock on the cellar door had been tampered with days ago, the mechanism loosened so that a single hard push would force it open. Iris had smuggled in a dress, simple but clean, hidden beneath a pile of old blankets, and the knife, her mother's knife, was strapped to her thigh, cold and reassuring against her skin. Alara closed her eyes and thought of the man she had met in the clearing, Theron Blackwood, the Alpha King, the ghost of Nightfang. He had been nothing like the stories said. The story spoke of a monster, a creature of rage and death who had drowned the realm in blood. But the man she had met was something else entirely. Scarred, yes. Haunted, certainly. But beneath the cold exterior, she had glimpsed something that surprised her. Pain, loss, a loneliness so vast it seemed to swallow everything around it. They were alike, she realized. Two broken creatures, surviving in a world that wanted them dead. The mark on her wrist began to glow faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She did not try to hide it this time, did not try to suppress whatever power was stirring inside her. She simply let it burn. "I am coming for you," she whispered to the darkness. "Whoever you are, whatever you have done, I am coming." The moon rose higher, its silver light seeping through the cracks in the cellar walls, and somewhere in the distance a wolf began to howl. The sound echoed through the night, mournful and ancient, carrying with it memories of battles fought and blood spilled beneath countless moons. It was joined by another voice, then another, until the entire forest seemed to tremble with the chorus of wolves calling to the sky. Alara listened, her hand pressed against the cold stone wall, and felt something stir in her chest. A response, an answer. As if her own wolf, dormant for so many years, was finally beginning to wake. She had never shifted. Most wolves experience their first transformation at puberty, when their bodies matured enough to contain the beast within. But Alara had waited and waited, enduring the mockery of her peers, the concerned looks of the healers, the cruel satisfaction in Morgana's eyes. They said she was defective, incomplete, a wolf who could not become a wolf. But now, feeling the power pulse through her veins, she wondered if they had been wrong. Perhaps she had not failed to shift. Perhaps she had simply been waiting for something, for someone, for the right moment to reveal what she truly was. The howling faded, leaving silence in its wake. Alara opened her eyes and looked down at her wrist, at the crescent-shaped mark that glowed steadily in the darkness. "Mother," she thought, "I do not know if you can hear me. I do not know if your spirit watches from whatever place the dead go when they leave us behind. But I want you to know that I remember. I remember your voice. I remember your smile. I remember the way you held me when I was frightened and told me that the moon would always protect her children." A tear slid down her cheek, but she did not wipe it away. "I have been so lost without you, so alone. There were times when I thought I could not continue, when the weight of their hatred was too heavy to bear. But I kept going. I survived, because somewhere deep inside, I knew that you did not die for nothing." The mark pulsed brighter, warm against her skin. "Tomorrow, I will find the truth. Tomorrow, I will face whatever destiny awaits me. And if the Council of Shadows thinks they can destroy what remains of your legacy, then they will learn what it means to threaten the last daughter of the Moonborn line." She rose to her feet, brushing the dust from her servant's dress. The footsteps overhead had grown quieter now. the household settling into an uneasy sleep. In a few hours, the carriages would depart for the ball. Morgana and Vivian would sweep down the grand staircase in their silk gowns, never suspecting that the girl they had tormented for 10 years was about to change everything. Alara allowed herself a small smile. It was not a pleasant expression. There was too much pain behind it, too much rage barely contained, but it was real, and that was something she had not felt in a very long time. She moved to the narrow window that let in a sliver of moonlight and pressed her palm against the glass. The moon hung overhead, fat and silver, just beginning to take on the reddish tint that heralded the blood moon's approach. "I am ready," she whispered to the night. "Whatever comes, I am ready." The moon seemed to pulse in response, its light intensifying for just a moment before fading back to its normal glow. And Alara, standing alone in the darkness of her prison, felt something she had not felt since her mother's death. Hope. In the Night Fang Keep, Theron Blackwood lay awake in his chamber and stared at the ceiling. Sleep had never come easily to him, not since the war. Too many ghosts crowded his dreams, too many memories waited in the darkness behind his eyes. But tonight was different. Tonight, the ghosts were quiet, and a different kind of restlessness kept him from slumber. He thought of Alara Ashford, of the fire in her silver eyes and the steel in her spine. She was young, yes, and damaged by years of abuse, but there was something in her that reminded him of the wolves who had fought beside him in the Great Pack War. That same desperate courage, that same refusal to surrender even when all hope seemed lost. She would need that courage in the days to come. The Council of Shadows did not forgive, did not forget, did not show mercy to those who threatened their power. If they learned what she truly was, they would move against her with everything they had. Unless Theron moved first. He rose from his bed and crossed to the window, looking out over the sleeping kingdom. Somewhere out there, in 100 different houses, wolves were preparing for the ball. Choosing their finest clothes, rehearsing their smiles, sharpening their words for the endless game of politics that defined high society. They had no idea what was coming. The Blood Moon Ball would be remembered for generations, not for the music or the dancing, not for the alliances formed or the romances kindled. It would be remembered as the night the old order began to crumble, the night the shadows were dragged into the light. Theron touched the scar on his chest one final time. "For you, brother," he thought, "for everyone they have taken from us." Then he turned from the window and began to prepare for war. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the dramas unfolding beneath them. The moon continued its slow journey across the sky, growing redder with each passing hour. And in the spaces between worlds, in the realm where the spirits of the dead whispered secrets to those who knew how to listen, a woman with silver eyes and midnight hair watched her daughter with pride. Seraphina Ashford had been many things in her life: a Luna, a warrior, a mother, a keeper of secrets. But she had never been a coward, and neither was her daughter. The time of hiding was over. The last of the Moonborn was rising, and the world would never be the same. The blood moon approached, painting the horizon in crimson and gold. Dawn was coming, bringing revelation and destruction. And caught between two worlds, two broken souls prepared to face their destiny together. The blood moon rose like a wound in the sky, casting its crimson light across the grand ballroom of the Night Fang Palace. 1,000 candles flickered in crystal chandeliers, their golden flames dancing with the red glow that seeped through the towering windows. The air was thick with perfume and ambition, with whispered promises and unspoken threats. Theron Blackwood stood at the entrance to the great hall and watched his kingdom parade before him. They came in waves, the noble families, each one more elaborately dressed than the last. Silk gowns in every color imaginable, jewels that caught the light and scattered it like fallen stars, smiles that never quite reached the eyes. He hated every moment of it. The mask he wore was not made of cloth or leather. It was something far more difficult to maintain. A mask of cold indifference, of regal distance, of the untouchable Alpha King who cared nothing for the petty games of his court. He had worn it for so long that sometimes he forgot where the mask ended and his true face began. General Marcus stood at his right shoulder, resplendent in his formal military attire. The old warrior's gray eyes swept the crowd constantly, searching for threats that might lurk behind the smiling faces. "Lord Aldrich approaches from the East Wing," Marcus murmured, his voice barely audible above the music. Theron did not turn his head. He had been tracking his former mentor since the moment the man entered the hall. Aldrich moved through the crowd like a shark through calm waters, pausing here and there to exchange pleasantries with the other nobles. To anyone watching, he appeared to be nothing more than an elderly statesman enjoying the festivities. But Theron saw the pattern in his movements, the careful positioning, the way his eyes lingered on certain guests before moving on. "He is counting his allies," Theron said quietly, "marking the ones who belong to him." "You truly believe he is part of the council?" "I believe nothing without proof, but I also trust nothing without verification." Aldrich reached the dais where Theron stood and offered a deep bow. The gesture was proper, respectful, exactly what protocol demanded, and yet there was something in the old wolf's eyes that made Theron's instincts howl with warning. "My king," Aldrich said smoothly, "the guests await your address. Shall I signal the musicians to pause?" "Not yet. I'm expecting one more arrival." Aldrich's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed? I was not aware of any additional delegations." "There are many things of which you are not aware, old friend." The words hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Aldrich's mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Then it was back, smooth and untroubled as still water. "As you say, my king." He retreated into the crowd, but Theron could feel his attention like a physical weight. The game had begun. Now it was simply a matter of waiting for the pieces to fall into place. On the far side of his palace, Elara pressed herself against the cold stone wall and tried to remember how to breathe. The servants' entrance was smaller than she had expected, a narrow doorway hidden behind a tapestry that depicted some ancient battle. She had slipped through it moments ago, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the guards would hear it from across the courtyard. But no one had noticed. No one ever noticed servants. The dress Iris had provided was simple but elegant, a deep blue gown that had been salvaged from Vivian's discarded wardrobe. It was slightly too large, held in place by careful stitching and desperate hope. But it was clean, and it was whole, and that was more than Elara had worn in years. Her mother's knife was strapped to her thigh, hidden beneath the flowing skirts. Its weight was comforting, a reminder that she was not as helpless as she appeared. She moved through the servants' corridors with the confidence of someone who belonged. That was the trick, she had learned. If you walked like you had every right to be somewhere, most people would assume you did. It was only hesitation that drew attention, only fear that marked you as prey. The corridors gave way to a small alcove overlooking the great hall. Elara pressed herself into the shadows and looked down at the spectacle below. It was magnificent. She had never seen anything like it, the sheer scale of wealth and power concentrated in a single room. The nobles glittered like living jewels, their laughter rising and falling in waves. Musicians played from a raised platform, their melody weaving through the crowd like a golden thread. And at the center of it all, standing on a raised dais near the great windows, was Theron Blackwood. He looked different tonight. In the forest, he had been a warrior, dressed in practical traveling clothes with a sword at his hip. Now he was every inch the king, his black coat gleaming with silver embroidery, his dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from stone. But his eyes were the same, golden and watchful, scanning the crowd with the patience of a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Elara tore her gaze away and focused on her true purpose. Somewhere in this palace were answers about her mother's death. Somewhere in this crowd were the wolves who had destroyed her family and stolen her birthright. She just had to find them. She descended a narrow staircase and emerged into a side corridor that led to the great hall. The sounds of the ball grew louder, the music and laughter mixing with the clink of glasses and the rustle of silk. She was almost to the main entrance when a voice froze her in her tracks. Well, well, look what crawled out of its hole. Vivian stepped from behind a pillar, her golden hair arranged in elaborate curls, her silver gown catching the candlelight like liquid metal. Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Did you really think you could sneak in here without anyone noticing?" Vivian moved closer, her eyes sweeping over Elara's borrowed dress with undisguised contempt. "And wearing my clothes, no less. How pathetic." Elara kept her voice steady. "I am leaving now, Vivian. I want no trouble." "Oh, but trouble is exactly what you are going to get." Vivian snapped her fingers, and 2 guards appeared from the shadows. They were large men, their faces blank with professional indifference. "This servant has stolen from the Silvercrest household," Vivian announced, her voice carrying down the corridor. She has infiltrated the royal ball under false pretenses. I demand she be taken into custody immediately." The guards moved forward, their hands reaching for Alara's arms. And something inside her snapped. She had spent 10 years being pushed down, 10 years being beaten and starved and told she was worthless. 10 years hiding her anger behind a mask of submission, swallowing her rage until it became a poison in her blood. No more. Her fist connected with the first guard's jaw before she even realized she had thrown the punch. He staggered backward, shock replacing the blankness on his face. The second guard lunged for her, but she ducked under his grasp and drove her elbow into his stomach. It was not elegant, it was not skilled, but it was effective. Vivian screamed, a high-pitched sound of fury and disbelief. The noise echoed down the corridor, cutting through the music from the great hall. "Guards! Guards! She is attacking us!" More footsteps thundered from both directions. Alara knew she had only seconds before she was overwhelmed. She reached for the knife at her thigh, her fingers closing around the moonstone handle. And then the world exploded into chaos. The doors to the great hall burst open, and wolves poured into the corridor. Not just guards now, but nobles as well, drawn by the commotion. They surrounded Alara in a ring of hostile faces and glittering jewelry. Lord Aldrich Vane pushed through the crowd, his weathered face twisted with righteous anger. "What is the meaning of this disturbance?" Vivian pointed at Alara, her hand trembling with theatrical outrage. "This creature attacked the royal guards. She infiltrated the ball disguised as a servant. She must be punished." Aldrich turned his cold gaze on Alara, and she saw recognition flicker in his eyes. For a moment, something like fear crossed his features. Then it was gone, replaced by a mask of stern authority. A commoner who raises her hand against the king's guards commits a capital offense. He raised his voice so that everyone could hear. By the laws of this realm, she must be executed immediately. The crowd murmured its approval. Alara looked around at the faces surrounding her, at the hunger in their eyes, and realized that her death would be entertainment to them. A diversion between dances. Something to gossip about over wine. She tightened her grip on the knife and prepared to fight to the end. "Stop!" The voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. The crowd parted instantly, instinctively, as Theron Blackwood strode into the corridor. He moved with the easy grace of absolute power, each step measured and deliberate. His golden eyes swept over the scene, taking in the fallen guards, the trembling Vivian, the defiant Alara with her knife drawn and her back against the wall. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, but it carried the weight of mountains. "Someone explain to me why you are attempting to execute a woman in my palace without my permission." Aldrich stepped forward, his composure barely wavering. "My king, this servant attacked your guards. The law is clear on such matters. The law also requires that the accused be given a chance to speak in their own defense." Theron's eyes never left Alara's face. "Unless you have decided to rewrite the laws of this kingdom without consulting me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Aldrich's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course not, my king. I merely assumed that given the obvious nature of the crime—" "Never assume." Theron moved past him, approaching Alara with slow, measured steps. "What is your name?" She met his gaze steadily, refusing to show fear. He knew her name, of course, but this was theater, a performance for the watching crowd. Alara Ashford. The name sent a visible shock through the assembled nobles. Ashford, the disgraced house, the murdered Luna. "You are a long way from Silvercrest, Alara Ashford." Theron stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his golden eyes. "Why have you come to my ball?" She could have lied, could have invented some story about wanting to see the festivities, about a servant's innocent curiosity, but something in his gaze demanded the truth. "I came to find answers about my mother's death. She was murdered, and the ones who killed her walk free while I am treated as a criminal for surviving." The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Vivian's voice cut through the silence, shrill and desperate. "She lies. She has always lied. She killed her own mother, and now she comes here to spread more poison." "Is that so?" Theron turned to face Vivian, and she shrank back from his gaze. "You seem very certain of events that happened when you were barely old enough to understand them."
That is, everyone knows."
"Everyone knows what they have been told." Theron looked back at Alara. "But I prefer to discover the truth for myself." He reached out and took her hand, the one that still gripped the knife. His touch was warm, steady, and something electric passed between them. something ancient and powerful that made Alara's breath catch in her throat. The mark on her wrist exploded into light. Silver fire erupted from the crescent-shaped birthmark, spiraling up her arm and casting wild shadows across the corridor. The crowd screamed and stumbled backward. Guards drew their swords. Chaos reigned. But Theron did not move. He stood perfectly still, his hand still clasping hers, his face lit by the otherworldly glow. And as Alara watched in horror and wonder, a matching light began to pulse from beneath his coat. He released her hand and tore open his shirt, revealing the massive scar that ran from his shoulder to his hip. Along its length, faintly at first but growing brighter with each passing second, the same silver fire traced patterns in his flesh. The mark of the Moonborn. On both of them. Lord Aldrich's voice was barely a whisper, but in the stunned silence it carried like a shout. Impossible, both bloodlines still exist. Theron turned to face his former mentor, and his expression made Aldrich take a step backward. You knew. His voice was low, dangerous, the growl of a wolf about to attack. You knew about the Moonborn, about the bloodlines, about all of it. My king, I do not know what you are suggesting. I am not suggesting anything. I am stating a fact. Theron stepped toward him, and the silver fire still dancing on his skin cast terrible shadows across his face. My mother died giving birth to me. My father never spoke of her, never allowed her name to be mentioned. I grew up believing she was a common wolf, unremarkable, unimportant. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Even Vivian had stopped her whimpering, her eyes wide with shock. But that was a lie, was it not, Aldrich? My mother was Moonborn. She carried the same bloodline as Lady Seraphina Ashford. Theron's hand shot out and seized Aldrich by the throat. And you knew, and you kept it from me. Why? Aldrich clawed at the iron grip, his face purpling. Because the council. Theron released him so suddenly that the old wolf staggered and fell to his knees. The Council of Shadows. The words were ice and fire, rage barely contained. They ordered you to keep me ignorant, to monitor me, to ensure that I never discovered the truth about my own blood. You do not understand. Aldrich coughed, struggling to his feet. The Moonborn are dangerous. Their power corrupts, destroys. The Council sought only to protect the realm from... The Council sought to control the realm! Theron's voice echoed through the corridor like thunder. They started the Great Pack War to consolidate their power. They murdered Lady Seraphina because she threatened their schemes. They have been pulling strings from the shadows for generations, and you have been their willing puppet. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Alara stepped forward, the silver fire still dancing on her wrist, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around her. The Council killed my mother. They destroyed my family. They tried to erase the Moonborn bloodline from existence. She looked at Theron, and something passed between them. An understanding, an alliance forged in shared pain, but they failed. We are still here, and now they will answer for their crimes. Aldrich laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You think you can fight them? You are children playing at war. The Council has existed for centuries. They have agents in every pack, every house, every position of power. You cannot even begin to imagine the forces arrayed against you. Theron smiled, and there was no warmth in it. Then let them come. Let them send their agents and their assassins. Let them throw everything they have at us. Because I have spent 10 years preparing for this moment. 10 years gathering intelligence, building alliances, waiting for the Council to reveal themselves. He turned to face the stunned crowd, raising his voice so that every wolf in the corridor could hear. Let it be known throughout the realm. The Council of Shadows has been exposed. Any wolf who has served them will be given one chance, and one chance only, to renounce their allegiance and swear loyalty to the crown. Those who refuse will be hunted down and destroyed. His gaze swept over the assembled nobles, and more than a few looked away in fear. The old order is finished. A new era begins tonight. He extended his hand to Alara, and she took it without hesitation. Together they walked through the parting crowd, leaving chaos and confusion in their wake. Behind them, Lord Aldrich watched with eyes that burned with hatred. But he did not follow. Not yet. The game had changed, but it was far from over. The days that followed the Blood Moon Ball were a whirlwind of activity. Theron installed Alara in a suite of rooms near his own chambers, protected by guards he trusted with his life. She was no longer a servant, no longer a prisoner, but her exact status remained unclear. She was not his Luna, not his mate, not anything that the court understood. She was simply Alara, the girl with silver fire on her skin and questions that demanded answers. They spent hours together, poring over documents and intelligence reports that Theron had gathered over the years. The Council of Shadows, they learned, was far more extensive than either of them had imagined. Its tendrils reached into every corner of the realm, its agents hidden behind masks of loyalty and respectability. 7, Theron said one evening, spreading a map across the table between them. There are 7 members of the inner circle, the ones who make the decisions, who pull the strings. Everyone else is just following orders. Alara studied the map, noting the locations Theron had marked. Do we know who they are? Some of them. Aldrich is one, obviously. He has fled the palace, but my scouts are tracking him. There are at least 2 others in positions of power, nobles who have been suspiciously resistant to my reforms over the years. And the other 4? Unknown. Theron leaned back in his chair, his golden eyes tired but determined. That is what we need to discover. Without knowing who we are fighting, we cannot hope to defeat them. Alara traced her finger along the map, following the lines of rivers and mountains. My mother knew. She must have. That is why they killed her. Yes. Theron's voice softened slightly. And that is why they will try to kill you. She looked up at him, and something passed between them. Not the instant connection of fated mates, not the romantic lightning bolt that the old stories described. Something more complex, more real. Respect, earned through honesty. Trust, built on shared purpose. The beginning of something that might, in time, become something more. You do not treat me like a servant, Alara said quietly. You have never treated me like a servant. Because you are not a servant. You are a survivor. Theron held her gaze steadily. I have known warriors who crumbled under far less than you have endured. The fact that you are still standing, still fighting, tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. Alara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she did not look away. And you are not the monster they say you are, the ghost of Nightfang, the butcher of the Great War. She shook her head. Those are just titles, masks. The real you is something else entirely. Theron was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. My brother believed in me. Even when I gave him no reason to, even when I was consumed by rage and vengeance, he believed that I could be better, that I could be a king worthy of the crown. What happened to him? The question hung in the air. Theron's jaw tightened. He died in my arms, during the final battle of the war. An enemy alpha was about to kill me, and Cassian threw himself in the way. He took the blade meant for my heart. Alara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The gesture was simple, instinctive, and Theron did not pull away. I am sorry. He did not deserve to die. He was kind and brave and full of life. He should have been the one to wear the crown, not me. Theron's golden eyes glistened in the candlelight. I have spent 10 years trying to be worthy of his sacrifice, trying to build the kingdom he believed we could create. But some days, the weight feels like it will crush me. You do not have to carry it alone. The words slipped out before Alara could stop them. She felt her face flush with embarrassment, but Theron's expression had changed. Something in his eyes had softened, warmed, become almost human. No, he said slowly. Perhaps I do not. The door opened and General Marcus entered without ceremony. The old warrior's face was grim. My king, we have a situation. Theron was on his feet instantly, all trace of vulnerability gone. What is it? Our agents have intercepted a message intended for Lord Aldrich. Marcus handed over a sealed letter. It contains information about the Council's next move. Theron broke the seal and read the contents, his expression growing darker with each line. When he looked up, his eyes were hard as stone. They are accelerating their plans. They intend to strike within the week. Strike at what? At everything. Theron handed the letter to Alara. They are going to expose Morgana's secret, the one thing that could turn even our potential allies against us. Alara read the letter, and her blood ran cold. My brother, she whispered. Morgana has a son, my half-brother, and the Council has been holding him hostage for 20 years. The truth hit her like a physical blow. All those years of cruelty, all those years of watching Morgana destroy everything she loved. She had assumed it was jealousy, hatred, simple evil, but the reality was far more complicated. Morgana had been a puppet, dancing on strings held by the Council of Shadows. They had taken her child and used him as leverage, forcing her to do their bidding. Every cruel word, every blow, every act of destruction had been performed under duress. It did not excuse what she had done. Nothing could excuse the murder of Lady Seraphina, the decade of abuse inflicted on Alara. But it changed things. It complicated them. "Where is he?" Alara demanded. "Where is my brother?" "We do not know." Marcus's voice was heavy. "The council has kept him hidden for 2 decades. Our best intelligence suggests he is being held somewhere in the northern territories, but the exact location remains unknown." "Then we find him." Alara stood, her silver eyes blazing. "We find him before the council can use him against us." Theron nodded slowly. "Agreed. But we must be strategic. If we move too quickly, they will simply kill him and remove the leverage entirely." "Then what do you suggest?" "We need someone on the inside, someone who knows where the council keeps their secrets." Theron's gaze grew distant, calculating. Someone who has been close to their operations for years. Alara followed his line of thinking and felt her stomach clench. "Morgana. She is being held in the palace dungeons, awaiting judgment for her crimes." Theron met her eyes. "If we offer her a chance at redemption, a chance to save her son, she might be willing to tell us everything she knows." "You want me to talk to the woman who murdered my mother? I want you to decide what matters more, revenge or justice." Theron's voice was not unkind. "I learned long ago that those 2 things are not always the same." Alara closed her eyes and felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Everything she had dreamed of for 10 years, the revenge she had planned, the justice she had craved, it all hinged on this moment. Could she face Morgana? Could she look into the eyes of the woman who had destroyed her life and offer her mercy? The answer, she realized, was yes. Not because Morgana deserved it, not because forgiveness came easily, but because there was a brother she had never known, a young man who had spent his entire life as a prisoner, and his freedom was worth more than her hatred. "Take me to her." The dungeons of Nightfang Palace were cold and dark, carved from living stone deep beneath the earth. Torches flickered in iron brackets, casting dancing shadows across walls that had witnessed centuries of suffering. Morgana sat in a cell at the end of the corridor, her fine clothes replaced with rough prison garb, her dark hair hanging in limp tangles around her face. She looked nothing like the imperious woman who had ruled the Silvercrest household with an iron fist. She looked broken, defeated. She looked human. Alara stopped outside the cell bars, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Theron stood a few paces behind, a silent presence of support. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Morgana raised her head, and her eyes, once so cold and cruel, were filled with resignation. "Have you come to gloat?" Her voice was hoarse, raspy from disuse. "To watch the mighty Morgana brought low? I have come for the truth." Morgana laughed bitterly. "The truth? You have always been so obsessed with the truth, just like your mother. You knew her." Alara stepped closer to the bars. "You knew her before she died, before you killed her." The words hit Morgana like a physical blow. She flinched, her composure cracking. "I did not want to kill her." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You have to believe that. Seraphina was kind to me once. She tried to help me, tried to free me from the council's control. But they found out, and they threatened your son." Morgana's head snapped up, shock evident on her face. "How did you know about—" "We intercepted a message." Theron spoke for the first time, his voice measured and calm. "We know the council has been holding your son hostage for 20 years. We know they used him to force your compliance." Tears began to stream down Morgana's face, cutting tracks through the dirt and grime. "Damien. His name is Damien. He was only 5 years old when they took him. 5 years old, and they ripped him from my arms and told me that if I ever defied them, they would send him back to me in pieces." Alara felt her heart clench despite herself. She had expected many things from this confrontation: anger, defiance, cold denial. She had not expected this raw, broken grief. Why did they want my mother dead? Because she knew too much. Morgana wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Seraphina had discovered the identity of the 7, the inner circle of the council. She was gathering evidence, preparing to expose them. They could not allow that. And me? Why did they want me destroyed? Because of what you are. Because of the power that sleeps in your blood. Morgana looked at Alara with something that might have been wonder. The Moonborn have always been a threat to the Council. Your abilities, when fully awakened, could tear their entire organization apart. They wanted you broken, diminished, so weak and damaged that you would never realize your true potential. Alara absorbed this in silence. All those years of abuse, all that cruelty and humiliation. It had not been random. It had been deliberate, calculated, designed to destroy her before she could become a threat. And Vivian? Does she know about any of this? Morgana hesitated. She knows about Damien. I told her years ago when she asked why I was so cold, so distant. But she does not know the full extent of the Council's reach. She thinks I am simply a victim. And are you? The question hung in the air. Morgana met her eyes steadily. I am many things. A victim, yes, but also a monster. I did terrible things to you, Alara. Things that can never be undone, never be forgiven. I told myself I had no choice, that I was protecting my son, but that does not change the suffering I caused. She reached through the bars, her hand trembling. I do not ask for your forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But if there is any way to save Damien, to undo some small part of the damage I have done, I will tell you everything I know. Alara looked at that trembling hand, at the woman who had been her tormentor for a decade. Every instinct screamed at her to turn away, to let Morgana rot in this cell. But there was a young man out there, a brother she had never known, who needed her help. And justice was not always the same as revenge. She took Morgana's hand. Tell us everything. The information Morgana provided changed everything. She knew the locations of 3 council safe houses, the identities of 2 additional members of the Inner Circle, and the general area where Damien was being held. She knew communication protocols, code words, the intricate web of bribes and blackmail that kept the organization functioning. It was not complete. 20 years of isolation had left gaps in her knowledge, but it was enough. Enough to plan, enough to act, enough to begin dismantling the shadow empire that had controlled the realm for generations. Theron gathered his most trusted advisors in the war room. General Marcus was there, along with a handful of military commanders who had proven their loyalty over years of service. And Alara. She stood at Theron's side, studying the maps and tactical diagrams with an intensity that surprised everyone present. This was not a role she had been trained for. She had no military experience, no formal education in the art of war. But she had something else, a quick mind, a survivor's instinct, and a personal stake in the outcome. We cannot attack all 3 safe houses simultaneously. General Marcus traced lines on the largest map. We do not have the forces to split our strength that much without leaving the palace vulnerable. Then we prioritize. Theron pointed to a location in the northern mountains. This one is closest to where Morgana believes Damien is being held. If we strike here first, we may find additional intelligence about his exact location. And the other 2 houses? We leak false information, make them believe we are planning to attack the southern location. They will reinforce it, drawing resources away from the north. Alara studied the map. Her silver eyes narrowed in concentration. What about Aldrich? He knows we are coming. He will have warned the council by now. Aldrich knows what we want him to know. Theron allowed himself a small smile. I have been feeding him misinformation for months. He thinks our primary target is the eastern stronghold. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You suspected him even before the ball? I suspected everyone. Trust is a luxury I have not been able to afford since the war. The planning continued for hours, details refined, contingencies discussed, roles assigned. By the time dawn light began to seep through the narrow windows, they had a workable strategy. 3 days. Theron stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of concentration. In 3 days, we move. Until then, no one speaks of this outside this room. The council has ears everywhere. The advisors filed out, leaving Theron and Alara alone in the war room. The maps spread around them seemed to pulse with possibility and danger. Are you ready for this? Theron asked quietly. Alara looked at him, at the weariness in his golden eyes. I have been ready for 10 years. I just did not know what I was ready for. He reached out and took her hand. The silver marks on both their wrists glowed faintly in response, ancient power recognizing ancient power. Whatever happens, Theron said, we face it together. No more fighting alone. Alara squeezed his hand. Together. The word felt strange on her tongue. She had been alone for so long, but standing here with Theron's hand in hers and the promise of battle on the horizon, she realized that she no longer wanted to be alone. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was hope. In her cell beneath the palace, Morgana Ashford knelt in the darkness and prayed. "Please," she whispered, "please let them succeed. Please let them save my son." She did not pray for herself. She knew she was beyond saving. The things she had done, the lives she had destroyed. No amount of penance could wash that blood from her hands. But Damien was innocent. Damien had suffered for her sins, had spent 20 years in captivity because of choices she had made. If there was any justice in the universe, he deserved to be free. And Alara. Morgana closed her eyes and saw the young woman's face, the silver fire dancing on her skin, the strength and courage that no amount of abuse had been able to extinguish. She looked so much like Seraphina, Morgana thought. The same eyes, the same spirit, the same power. Lady Seraphina Ashford had been the only person who had ever truly tried to help her. When the council first approached Morgana, when they revealed that they had taken her son, Seraphina had offered to fight, had offered to use her moonborn abilities to track down Damien, to destroy the council from within. But Morgana had been too afraid, too broken by grief and terror to accept help, and so she had done what the council demanded. She had lured Seraphina to the cliff edge on a stormy night. She had pushed her into the ravine, and she had spent every day since then trying to forget the look in Seraphina's eyes as she fell. Not fear, not anger, forgiveness. Even in that final moment, Seraphina had understood, had known that Morgana was acting under duress, that her cruelty was born from desperation rather than malice. "Take care of my daughter," Seraphina had whispered as she fell. "Promise me." Morgana had broken that promise 1,000 times over. But perhaps, if the gods were merciful, she could begin to make amends. She pressed her forehead against the cold stone floor and continued to pray. Miles away, in a fortress carved into the heart of a mountain, a young man with dark hair and haunted eyes stared out at the stars. Damien had long since stopped counting the days of his imprisonment. Time had become meaningless, a blur of gray walls and silent guards and the occasional visitor who reminded him of his value as a hostage. But something had changed recently. There was tension in the air, urgency in the whispered conversations of his captors. Something was happening in the outside world, something that made them nervous. And for the first time in 20 years, Damien allowed himself to feel something he had buried long ago: hope. He did not know what was coming, did not know who, if anyone, was fighting for his freedom. But he could sense it, feel it in his bones, the approaching storm that would either save him or destroy him. Either way, the waiting was almost over. The blood moon had set, but its influence lingered. The realm held its breath, waiting for the next move in a game that had been playing out for generations. And in the shadows, the Council of Shadows prepared for war. They had underestimated Theron Blackwood, had underestimated the girl with silver fire in her veins, had assumed that their centuries of power made them invincible. They were about to learn otherwise. The final battle was coming. And when it arrived, nothing would ever be the same. War came to the realm like a fever, spreading from village to village, pack to pack, until the entire kingdom burned with conflict. Lord Aldrich Vane had not fled into hiding as Theron had expected. Instead, he had raised a banner of rebellion, calling upon every wolf who feared the moonborn bloodline to stand against the crown. His message was simple, effective, and devastating. The Alpha King has been corrupted by ancient power. The Moonborn are abominations, creatures of darkness who will destroy everything we have built. Join me, and we will purge this evil from our land. Half the realm believed him. Theron stood in the war room of Nightfang Palace, watching the reports pile up like autumn leaves. Pack after pack was declaring for Aldrich, their leaders swayed by fear and generations of propaganda against the Moonborn. The Council of Shadows had spent centuries planting these seeds of hatred, and now they were reaping the harvest. "We are losing ground in the Eastern Territories." General Marcus traced lines on the map with a weathered finger. Lord Harkin and Lord Vessel have both declared for Aldrich. Their combined forces number nearly 3,000. "And our strength? Just under 2,000. Marcus met Theron's eyes without flinching. "We are outnumbered, my king. If we meet them in open battle, we will be destroyed." Theron turned to the window, looking out over the courtyard where his soldiers trained. Good men, loyal men, men who would die for him without hesitation. He could not let that happen. "Then we do not meet them in open battle." His voice was calm, steady, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside him. "We use what advantages we have: speed, intelligence, the element of surprise." Alara stepped forward from where she had been studying a separate set of documents. I have been coordinating with the Omega Network. They are everywhere, in every household, every kitchen, every servant's quarters. The nobles do not notice them because they do not consider them worth noticing. And what have they learned? She spread a sheet of parchment on the table, covered in small, precise handwriting. Aldrich's supply lines run through the Thornwood Pass. His army depends on provisions from the southern granaries. If we cut those lines, his forces will begin to starve within a week. Marcus studied the map with new interest. The pass is narrow. A small force could hold it against a much larger army. That is what I was thinking. Alara met his gaze without flinching. 50 wolves, properly positioned, could block the entire route. The old general's expression shifted from surprise to something approaching respect. You have a tactical mind, girl. I have a survivor's mind. I learned long ago to find the weak points in any situation. It was the only way to stay alive. Theron felt a surge of pride that surprised him. In the week since the Blood Moon Ball, Alara had transformed from a frightened servant into something far more formidable. She trained with his soldiers every morning, her natural agility compensating for her lack of formal instruction. She studied maps and reports late into the night, her quick mind absorbing information like a sponge. She was becoming a leader, a partner, something he had never expected to find. The pass is only part of the solution, Theron said, forcing his thoughts back to the matter at hand. We still need to rescue Damien and neutralize Aldrich himself. Without their hostage, the Council loses much of their leverage. Without their leader, the rebellion loses its figurehead. And how do you propose to accomplish both simultaneously? Marcus asked. We split our forces. Theron began placing markers on the map. You take the main army to the pass, hold the supply lines, draw Aldrich's attention. Meanwhile, I lead a small strike team to the mountain fortress where Damien is being held. Alara shook her head. I should lead the rescue mission. Damien is my brother, my responsibility. Damien is leverage against both of us. If you are captured, the Council gains even more power over the situation. And if you are captured, the kingdom loses its king. They stared at each other across the table, neither willing to back down. The air between them crackled with tension and something else, something that had been building since the moment they first met in that forest clearing. Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps there is a third option. Before he could elaborate, the doors burst open and a young soldier rushed in, his face pale with urgency. My king, there is someone at the gates. She says she has information about the Council. She says she is willing to die to deliver it. Who? The soldier swallowed hard. Lady Vivian Ashford. Vivian looked nothing like the pampered princess who had sneered at Alara in the halls of Silvercrest Manor. Her golden hair was tangled and dirty. Her once perfect face bore the marks of hard travel and harder choices. Her silver gown had been replaced by simple traveling clothes, torn and stained from days on the road. But it was her eyes that showed the greatest change. The cruelty was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate and painfully human. She stood in the great hall, surrounded by guards who watched her with undisguised suspicion. When Alara entered, followed by Theron and Marcus, Vivian flinched as if expecting a blow. I know you have no reason to trust me. Her voice was hoarse, broken by exhaustion and emotion. I know what I did to you, what I helped my mother do. I was cruel and petty, and I enjoyed watching you suffer because it made me feel powerful. Alara said nothing. She simply watched, her silver eyes unreadable. But I did not know. Vivian's voice cracked. I did not know about Damien, about the Council, about any of it. I thought my mother was simply cold, simply ambitious. I did not realize she was a prisoner, just like you. What has changed? Theron asked quietly. Everything. Vivian wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When you exposed Lord Aldrich at the ball, when the truth about the Moonborn bloodline came out, I started asking questions. I went to my mother's study, searched through her private papers, and I found letters. Correspondence with members of the Council going back 20 years. She reached into her traveling bag and pulled out a bundle of documents, holding them out with trembling hands. Locations, names, everything she was forced to record for them, including the exact location of the fortress where they are holding Damien. Alara took the documents, her face still expressionless. And you came all this way just to deliver these? No. Vivian's voice dropped to a whisper. I came to make amends. I came to help you rescue my brother. Your brother? Damien is my half-brother, just as he is yours. My mother told me the truth before I left. He is the reason she became what she became. He is the reason all of us have suffered, and I intend to bring him home, or die trying." The silence that followed was heavy with years of pain and broken trust. Alara studied Vivienne's face, searching for any sign of deception, any hint of the cruelty she had known so well. She found only desperation and grief. "You understand that I cannot forgive you. Not yet. Perhaps not ever." "I understand." Vivienne met her gaze steadily. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for a chance to prove that I am more than what I was raised to be." Alara turned to Theron, and something passed between them. A question, a decision. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "Then you will have your chance." Alara looked back at Vivienne. "But know this, if you betray us, if any of this is a trick, I will kill you myself. That is not a threat, it is a promise." Vivienne bowed her head. "I would expect nothing less." The night before the battle, Theron found Alara on the eastern rampart, staring out at the mountains that held her brother prisoner. The moon hung overhead, still tinged with the fading red of the blood moon, casting long shadows across the stone walls. The wind carried the scent of pine and coming snow, a reminder that winter was approaching and time was running short. "You should be resting." Theron came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Tomorrow will demand everything we have. I could say the same to you." He acknowledged the point with a slight incline of his head. "Sleep has never come easily to me. Too many ghosts." "Tell me about them." Alara's voice was soft, not prying, simply open. "Tell me about your ghosts." Theron was silent for a long moment, staring out at the distant peaks. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. "My brother Cassian was the opposite of me in every way. Where I was serious, he was playful. Where I was cautious, he was reckless. He believed in the goodness of people, in the possibility of peace, in all the things I had learned to dismiss as naive fantasies." "What happened to him?" "The Great Pack War. The final battle. We were fighting side by side, as we always did, when an enemy alpha broke through our lines. He was aiming for me, for the killing blow that would have ended the Blackwood line forever. And Cassian stepped between us." Alara reached out and took his hand. The gesture was simple, instinctive, and Theron found himself gripping her fingers like a lifeline. "He died in my arms. I held him while the battle raged around us, while our soldiers fought and bled and died. I held him and watched the light fade from his eyes and felt something inside me go dark forever." "You blame yourself. I was the older brother, the stronger one. I should have protected him. Instead, I let my guard down, and he paid the price." Alara was quiet for a moment, her thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of his hand. "My mother used to tell me that guilt is the heaviest burden a soul can carry. It does not protect the ones we have lost. It only crushes the ones who remain." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Alara's voice grew wistful. "She used to take me to the forest at night, when everyone else was sleeping. She would show me the constellations and tell me stories about the ancient wolves who had placed them in the sky. She made me feel like I was part of something bigger, something that would endure long after both of us were gone. I wish I could have met her." "I wish that too." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. The tension that had defined their relationship from the beginning had shifted into something else, something deeper and more complex. Respect, earned through honesty. Trust, built on shared purpose. "I have spent 10 years pushing people away." Theron spoke slowly, as if the words were being dragged from somewhere deep inside him. "I convinced myself that isolation was strength, that needing no one meant I could not be hurt. But the truth is that I was simply afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of feeling, of caring, of losing someone else the way I lost Cassian." Alara turned to face him, her silver eyes luminous in the moonlight. "I understand that fear. I have lived with it for most of my life, but I have learned something in these past weeks, something I never expected." "What is that?" "That the risk of loss is worth the chance at connection. That a life spent hiding from pain is not really a life at all." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I do not regret any of this. Not the danger, not the uncertainty, not a single moment." Theron covered her hand with his own, pressing it against his cheek. "Neither do I." They stood like that for a long moment, two broken souls finding solace in each other's presence. It was not the passionate embrace of young lovers, not the lightning strike of fated mates. It was something quieter, deeper, more real. It was the beginning of love earned through pain and trust built from the ashes of loss. "When dawn comes," Theron said finally, "we face whatever waits together." Together, Alara agreed, and for the first time in 10 years, neither of them felt alone. The attack on the mountain fortress began at midnight. Theron led the strike team through narrow passes and hidden trails, moving with the silent precision of wolves on the hunt. Behind him came 50 of his best warriors, hand-picked for their skill and their loyalty. Among them moved Alara and Vivian, unlikely allies united by a shared purpose. General Marcus had taken the main army south, beginning the siege of Thornwood Pass. Reports indicated that Aldrich had taken the bait, redirecting forces to protect his supply lines. The fortress would be lightly defended. At least that was the plan. They reached the fortress walls just as the moon began its descent toward the western horizon. The ancient stone structure rose from the mountainside like a clenched fist, dark and forbidding and seemingly impregnable. But Vivian had provided detailed maps of the interior, including a drainage tunnel that led directly to the lower dungeons. It would be tight, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. "Remember the plan." Theron gathered his team in the shadow of a rocky outcrop. "We enter through the tunnel, secure Damien, and extract before they know we are there. No unnecessary fighting, no heroics. We get in, we get the boy, we get out." The warriors nodded, checking their weapons one final time. Alara caught Theron's eye and gave him a small nod. "Ready." They moved. The drainage tunnel was everything Theron had feared and worse. Cold water seeped through the ancient stones, filling the narrow passage with a chill that cut to the bone. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint phosphorescent glow of moss clinging to the walls. They moved in single file, Theron at the front, Alara close behind. The sound of dripping water echoed around them, masking their footsteps but also hiding any approach of enemies. After what felt like hours, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Torches flickered in iron brackets, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with cells. The dungeons. Theron held up a fist, signaling the team to halt. He counted the guards, 3 visible, possibly more around the corner. Manageable. He pointed to 2 of his warriors and made a series of hand signals. They nodded and melted into the shadows, moving to flanking positions. The attack was swift and silent. The guards never had a chance to cry out, never even saw the blades that ended their lives. Within seconds, the dungeon chamber was secure. Alara moved forward, her eyes scanning the cells. Most were empty, their bars rusted with disuse. But at the far end of the row, a single torch burned above a heavy iron door. She felt it before she saw it. A pull in her chest, a recognition that went deeper than blood. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. Inside the cell, a young man sat against the far wall, his dark hair matted and his face pale from years without sunlight. He looked up as the door opened, his eyes widening with something between hope and terror. "Damien." He stared at her, confusion evident in his features. He did not know her. Of course he did not. He had been taken when he was 5 years old, before Alara was even born. "My name is Alara." She kept her voice low, gentle. "I am your sister, and I have come to take you home." The tears that spilled down Damien's face were answer enough. They were halfway to the extraction point when the alarm bells began to toll. Someone had discovered the bodies. The fortress was waking, torches flaring to life in windows, shouts echoing off the stone walls. The element of surprise was gone. "Move!" Theron commanded, pushing the team into a run. "We need to reach the north gate before they can organize a response." They sprinted through corridors that Vivian called out from memory. Damien supported between 2 soldiers, his legs weak from years of captivity. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. They burst into the main courtyard just as a wave of guards poured from the opposite entrance. For a moment, everything froze, 2 forces facing each other across the moonlit stones. Then Aldrich stepped from the shadows. The old wolf had aged since the blood moon ball, his face haggard with stress and sleepless nights. But his eyes still burned with the same cold intelligence, the same calculating cruelty that had made him the most dangerous member of the council. "You always were predictable, Theron." His voice carried across the courtyard like poison. "I knew you would come for the boy. I was counting on it." Guards flooded the courtyard from every entrance, surrounding the strike team in a ring of steel. Theron counted the numbers and felt his heart sink. They were outnumbered at least 3 to 1. "This ends tonight." Aldrich drew his sword, the blade gleaming in the moonlight. "The moonborn curse dies with you, both of you." You still do not understand. Theron stepped forward to meet him, his own sword sliding from its sheath. The Moonborn are not a curse. They are a gift, a power meant to heal and protect, not to destroy. Pretty words from a corrupted king. They circled each other slowly, decades of shared history weighing between them. Teacher and student, mentor and protege, two wolves who had once trusted each other completely. You trained me. Theron's voice was heavy with betrayal. You taught me everything I know about leadership, about strategy, about what it means to be a king. And all along, you were working to destroy me. I was working to save the realm from the Moonborn plague. Everything I did for the greater good. The greater good, Theron laughed bitterly. How many have died for your greater good, Aldrich? How many innocents have been sacrificed on the altar of your fear? Not fear, wisdom. Aldrich's eyes flashed with conviction. I have seen what the Moonborn can do when their power is unleashed. I have seen the destruction, the chaos, the complete annihilation of everything we hold dear. I swore an oath to prevent that from ever happening again. And so you murdered Lady Seraphina. You stole a child from his mother. You manipulated and controlled and destroyed countless lives, all in service to your precious oath. I did what was necessary. Theron raised his sword. So will I. They came together in a clash of steel that echoed off the fortress walls. Aldrich was old, but his skill had not diminished with age. He fought with the precision of a master, every stroke calculated to exploit weakness, every parry designed to create opportunity. But Theron had spent 10 years honing his abilities, driven by grief and rage and the desperate need to become something more than he was. He met Aldrich's attacks with ferocity that pushed the older wolf backwards step by step. Around them, the battle raged. Theron's warriors fought with desperate courage against overwhelming odds, buying time for their king. Alara stood over Damien, her mother's knife in hand, cutting down any guard who came too close. And Vivienne made her choice. She had been hanging back, uncertain of her role in the chaos. But when she saw a group of guards breaking through toward Damien, something inside her snapped. The girl who had spent her life being pampered and protected discovered a courage she never knew she possessed. She threw herself at the guards, fighting with untrained ferocity, buying precious seconds for the others to regroup. It was not graceful, it was not skilled, but it was brave. A blade found her side, then another. She fell to her knees, blood pouring from wounds that no amount of willpower could heal. Alara screamed her name and tried to reach her, but more guards blocked the way. She could only watch as Vivienne crumpled to the stones. In the midst of his duel with Aldrich, Theron saw the girl fall, saw the horror on Alara's face, felt something shift in the balance of the battle. Aldrich saw it too, and pressed his advantage, driving Theron back with a flurry of strikes. His blade found flesh, opening a deep wound across Theron's shoulder. Blood poured down the king's arm, weakening his grip on his sword. It is over. Aldrich raised his blade for the killing blow. The Blackwood line ends tonight. In that moment, suspended between life and death, Theron felt something stir inside him, something ancient and powerful and impossible to contain. The moonborn blood that had slept in his veins for 32 years finally awakened. Silver fire erupted from his chest, blazing along the lines of his scar, filling the courtyard with light so bright that guards threw up their hands to shield their eyes. The power roared through him, healing his wounds, strengthening his limbs, transforming him into something more than human. He caught Aldrich's descending blade with his bare hand, the steel shattering against his palm like glass. "You are wrong about the Moonborn." Theron's voice resonated with power that made the stones tremble. "We are not destruction. We are salvation." He released his grip, and Aldrich stumbled backward, his eyes wide with terror. Across the courtyard, Alara felt the same power igniting inside her. Her mother's blood sang in her veins, answered the call of Theron's awakening, merged with it into something greater than either could have achieved alone. Silver light poured from both of them, meeting in the center of the courtyard, intertwining like lovers in a dance as old as time itself. The guards who had been pressing the attack fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the raw force of moonborn power unleashed. And in that moment of transcendence, Alara heard a voice she had not heard in 10 years. "My brave girl." She turned, and her mother was there. Not physically, not really, but present nonetheless. A shimmer of silver light in the shape of the woman who had died protecting her daughter. "You were never weak." Seraphina's voice was warm, proud, full of love that death could not diminish. "You were never broken. You were waiting, growing, becoming what you were always meant to be. Mother. Alara felt tears streaming down her face. I do not know what to do. There is too much power. I cannot control it. You do not need to control it. You need to direct it. Think of what you want to protect. Think of who you love. Let that be your anchor. Alara looked across the courtyard at Theron, blazing with silver fire, fighting to save everything he held dear. She looked at Damien, the brother she had never known, cowering behind the soldiers who protected him. She looked at Vivian, bleeding on the stones, the sister who had finally found redemption. And she knew what she had to do. She gathered the power inside her, all the pain and loss and love of 24 years, and she released it. Not as destruction, not as chaos, but as healing. Silver light washed across the courtyard in a wave that touched every living soul. Vivian gasped as her wounds closed, as blood ceased to flow and flesh knit itself together. The fallen warriors stirred, their injuries fading like morning mist. Even the enemy guards found themselves healed of cuts and bruises, though the moonborn power left them drained and submissive. Theron felt the healing touch as well, felt his shoulder repair itself, felt strength pour back into muscles that had been failing. He looked at Alara across the silver light and saw her for what she truly was. Not just a survivor, not just a partner, a queen. Aldrich fell to his knees, his sword clattering to the stones. The battle was over. His forces were broken, not by death, but by mercy, by a display of power that proved everything he believed about the Moonborn was wrong. Kill me. His voice was hollow, defeated. Finish it. Theron stood over his former mentor, the silver fire fading from his skin. He could feel the weight of expectation from every wolf in the courtyard. They expected execution. They expected revenge. He sheathed his sword. No. Death would be too easy. You will live, Aldrich. You will watch as everything you tried to destroy flourishes. You will see the realm healed, the Pax united, the Moonborn legacy restored. And you will know that your entire life was wasted in service to a lie. Aldrich's face contorted with something between rage and despair. Then he lunged for a fallen guard's weapon, bringing the blade up toward his own throat. By my own hand, then, I will not live in your world. The steel bit deep. Blood sprayed across the moonlit stones. And Lord Aldrich Vane, architect of the Council of Shadows, fell dead at the feet of the king he had tried to destroy. The silence that followed was absolute. The dawn that broke over the mountains was unlike any the realm had ever seen. The sky blazed with colors that seemed almost supernatural, golds and silvers and deep crimsons that painted the clouds in shades of new beginnings. The war was over. Reports flooded in from across the kingdom. With Aldrich's death, the rebellion had collapsed. Pack after pack was returning their allegiance to the crown, their leaders shaken by the display of moonborn power and the mercy that had followed it. The Council of Shadows was broken. Their safe houses had been raided, their agents exposed, their conspiracy unraveled in a matter of days. Some fled into exile. Others surrendered and begged for mercy. A few chose Aldrich's path, preferring death to defeat. In the great hall of Nightfang Palace, Theron sat on his throne and accepted the submission of the returning lords. Beside him stood Alara, no longer dressed in servant's clothes, but in the silver gown of a Luna. Her wrist bore the openly displayed mark of the Moonborn, a symbol that had once meant death and now meant hope. Damien stood at Theron's right hand, still recovering from 20 years of captivity, but growing stronger every day. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's stubborn chin, and he looked at his half-sister with a devotion that went beyond words. Vivian had survived. The healer said it was a miracle, that the wounds she had suffered should have been fatal. But Alara knew the truth. The Moonborn power had saved her, had chosen to preserve the life of a woman who had finally found the courage to be good. She stood now at the edge of the hall, uncertain of her place in this new world. The cruelty she had shown to Alara for years could not be easily forgotten, but neither could her sacrifice. It would take time, but healing was possible. Morgana had been brought from the dungeons to witness her son's rescue and her daughter's survival. She had wept for hours, clutching Damien's hand as if afraid he would disappear if she let go. Theron had offered her exile rather than execution. She had accepted gratefully, knowing that she had received far more mercy than she deserved. She would leave the realm and never return, carrying with her the weight of her crimes and the hope that somewhere, somehow, she might find peace. Before she left, she had sought out Alara for one final conversation. "I know you cannot forgive me," Her voice was raw from crying. "But I want you to know that I am proud of you, proud of the woman you have become despite everything I did to break you." Alara had looked at the woman who had tormented her for a decade, who had murdered her mother, who had stolen her childhood, and she had felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness, that was too much to ask, but release, the letting go of hatred that had weighed her down for so long. "Go," she had said, "live your life, and try to become someone worth saving." Morgana had wept and nodded and walked away into the morning light, leaving behind a past that could never be changed. The coronation took place on the first night of the new moon. The great hall blazed with torches and candles, filled to overflowing with wolves from every pack in the realm. They had come to witness history, to see the crowning of the first Luna Queen in 1,000 years. Alara stood before the assembled multitude, her silver gown catching the light like liquid moonshine. The crown that had belonged to the first Luna rested on a velvet cushion before her, ancient silver worked with symbols whose meaning had been lost to time. Theron took the crown in his hands and raised it high for all to see. "For 10 years I have ruled this realm alone." His voice carried to every corner of the hall. "I believed that strength meant isolation, that a king needed no one to be powerful. I was wrong." He turned to face Alara, and the hardness that had defined his features for so long was gone, replaced by something warmer and infinitely more human. True strength is not the absence of need. It is the courage to trust, the wisdom to accept help, the grace to share power with those who have earned it. He placed the crown on Alara's head, and the ancient silver seemed to glow with inner light. "I present to you Alara of the Moonborn line, Luna Queen of the realm, my partner in all things." The crowd erupted in cheers that shook the rafters. Wolves howled their approval, the sound rising into the night sky like a prayer to the moon that watched overhead. Alara looked out at the sea of faces, at the joy and hope that shone in their eyes. These were her people now, her responsibility, her family. She felt the weight of the crown on her head and the greater weight of the trust it represented. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was exactly where she was meant to be. In the months that followed, the realm transformed. The House of Moonborn rose from the foundations of the old Silvercrest estate, rebuilt not as a monument to power, but as a sanctuary for those who had been cast aside. Omegas came from across the kingdom, wolves who had been abused and neglected and told they were worthless. They found safety within its walls, training and education, and the chance to become something more. Alara oversaw it personally, spending hours each week with the new arrivals, listening to their stories, sharing her own. She had walked the path they were walking. She knew how dark it could get, and she knew that light was possible. General Marcus recovered from his wounds, aided by regular visits from healers trained in the Moonborn arts. He remained Theron's most trusted advisor, his gruff wisdom tempering the king's occasional impulses. Damien flourished in his new role as the king's right hand. 20 years of captivity had left scars that would never fully heal, but he had inherited his mother's resilience and his father's determination. He threw himself into learning the arts of governance, determined to make up for the decades stolen from him. And Theron and Alara built something neither had thought possible. Not a fairy tale romance, not the instant perfection of fated mates, something more real, more earned, a partnership founded on mutual respect, tempered by shared hardship, deepened by the slow accumulation of trust and understanding and love. They argued sometimes, their strong personalities clashing over matters of policy and priority, but they always found their way back to each other, always remembered that they were stronger together. On a spring evening, 6 months after the coronation, they stood together on the eastern balcony of Nightfang Palace. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Below them, the kingdom spread out in peaceful prosperity, its wounds finally beginning to heal. "Tomorrow there will be new challenges." Theron's voice was contemplative. New threats to face, new problems to solve. Alara leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "Then we will face them together." "Together!" He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I never knew how much I needed that word until I found you." She smiled, looking up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "My mother used to tell me that every ending is also a beginning, that the darkest nights lead to the brightest dawns." "Your mother was a wise woman." "She was, and I think she would be proud of what we have built." The moon rose over the mountains, no longer red with blood, but silver with promise. Its light washed over the land, touching every shadow, reaching every hidden corner, illuminating a world that had finally learned to embrace what it had once feared. The story of the Moonborn was not over. It would never truly be over, not as long as the bloodline continued and the moon watched from the sky. There would be new challenges, new enemies, new tests of faith and courage and love. But for now, in this moment, there was peace, and that was enough. Alara closed her eyes and felt the power sleeping inside her, the ancient gift that had been passed from mother to daughter across countless generations. It was part of her now, woven into the fabric of her being, as natural as breathing. She thought of all she had survived, the abuse, the isolation, the years of being told she was worthless. She thought of the girl who had scrubbed floors and dreamed of escape, who had hidden in shadows and feared the sound of approaching footsteps. That girl was gone. In her place stood a queen, a healer, a warrior who had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. But she was also still that girl, would always carry that girl inside her. The suffering had made her who she was, had forged her in flames of cruelty and shaped her into something unbreakable. She would not wish that pain on anyone, but she would not trade it either. The moon continued its slow journey across the sky, eternal and unchanging, watching over its children as it had since the beginning of time. And somewhere in the realm below, a young Omega girl looked up at its silver light and felt the first stirring of hope. The last of the Moonborn had risen, and her legacy was just beginning. The chronicles would remember this era as the Age of Silver, a time when the old hatreds finally died and something new grew in their place. They would tell stories of the ghost king who learned to love, of the servant girl who became a queen, of the brother rescued from darkness, and the sister who found redemption. But the truest stories, the ones that mattered most, were not written in chronicles or sung by bards. They were whispered between mothers and daughters, passed from generation to generation like precious heirlooms. They were stories of hope, of perseverance, of the unbreakable human spirit that could survive any darkness and emerge stronger on the other side. Alara would tell those stories to her own children when they came. She would hold them close and point to the moon and explain that they carried something special in their blood, a gift and a responsibility. And she would tell them the most important truth of all. That strength was not the absence of fear. That courage was not the absence of doubt. That love was not a weakness, but the greatest power any soul could possess. The moon rose higher, bathing the realm in silver light that touched every shadow and reached every hidden heart. And beneath its eternal gaze, Theron and Alara stood together, two souls forged in fire, united by fate, bound by choice. The last of the Moonborn had found her place, and the world would never be the same.